The sky above Prime had been beautiful once. Twin suns painted the crystal towers in shades of gold and rose every morning. The people would stand on their balconies and watch the light dance through their transparent bodies. They were beings of living crystal, delicate and beautiful, and their world matched their nature. But that was before the shadow came. Ambassador stood at the great window of the High Council chamber and looked up at the darkness. 200 warships hung in orbit like a disease. They blocked the light of the twin suns. They turned day into endless twilight. For 7 cycles now, nothing had entered or left Prime. The Dominion had wrapped their world in chains of metal and fire. Ambassador, a soft voice called from behind him, the Council awaits your decision. Turned slowly. His crystalline form caught the dim emergency lights and scattered them like dying stars. Around the curved table sat the 12 members of the High Council. They were the oldest and of the... They had guided their people through 10,000 years of peace. None of them knew how to fight a war. They have sent their final message, said. His voice was calm, but the colors inside his crystal body swirled with fear. We have 3 cycles to surrender. If we do not, they will begin harvesting. A shudder ran through the council. Everyone knew what harvesting meant. There were beings, creatures of hard shells and clicking mandibles and cold, hungry eyes. They did not want them as slaves. They wanted them as raw materials. Crystal bodies could be ground down into valuable components. Minds could be extracted and used to power computers. Then we surrender, said council member. Her form flickered with distress. What choice do we have? We have no weapons, no warships. We are scholars and diplomats. We cannot fight. Surrender means death, another council member argued. Slow death instead of fast death, but death all the same. The argument continued. It had been continuing for 7 cycles now. Round and round, the same words, the same fears, the same helplessness. I had listened to it all. He had considered every option, and he had made his decision 3 cycles ago. He had simply been too afraid to speak it. There is one possibility, he said quietly. The council fell silent. They looked at him with hope in their translucent faces. The emergency beacon, continued. The one connected to the Galactic Compact Defense Network. The Compact has already refused to help, said bitterly. They say we are too far from their territory. The K claim they cannot spare ships. They have not even responded to our messages. No one will fight for us. There is one species we have not asked. The silence in the chamber grew heavy. A watched understanding dawned on the council members' faces. One by one, their crystal forms began to pulse with new colors. Fear, shock, horror. You cannot mean, whispered. The humans, confirmed. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the humans. They were the species to achieve space travel, barely 2 centuries into their exploration of the stars. They came from a world called Earth, a Class 12 in a distant arm of the galaxy. The classification alone was enough to terrify most species. Class 12 was the highest danger rating the Galactic Compact assigned to any planet. Earth was a world of constant violence. Its weather tried to kill its inhabitants with storms, floods, and freezing cold. Its ground shook and split open. Fire fell from mountains, and the life forms that evolved there were monsters beyond imagination. The humans had survived it all. They had not just survived, they had conquered. They breathed an atmosphere of corrosive oxygen. They drank water, a universal solvent that could dissolve almost any substance. Their bodies were made of soft flesh and weak bones, yet they were persistent predators who could chase prey for days without stopping. They healed from wounds that would kill other species. They consumed the flesh of other animals for nutrition. And their minds were perhaps the most dangerous thing about them. Humans did not think like other species. They did not follow logic or reason. They made decisions based on things they called instinct and gut feelings. They laughed at danger. They ran toward explosions. They formed emotional bonds with anything and everything, including machines and animals and even their enemies. The reports from the few Galactic Compact observers who had visited human space were disturbing reading. The humans fought wars for entertainment. They poisoned themselves with chemical substances for pleasure. They had weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and instead of dismantling them, they had built more. "The humans are chaos incarnate," said, her voice trembling. "They are unpredictable, dangerous. There are reports that they keep predatory animals in their homes as companions. They jump from perfectly functional aircraft for recreation. They have a form of entertainment that involves watching other humans fight until one cannot stand." "I have read the reports," A replied. "Then how can you suggest this? Even if they agreed to help us, what would stop them from simply taking our world for themselves? They are conquerors, destroyers." A moved closer to the council table. The emergency lights caught his form and made strange patterns on the walls. "The reports also say other things," he said. "Humans form strong bonds with those they consider allies. They protect the weak with violent dedication. There are records of individual humans sacrificing their lives to save complete strangers. They have a concept called honor that drives them to keep their promises even when it is not logical to do so." "Pretty words," another council member muttered. "Pretty words from a species that has fought more wars against itself than the entire Compact has fought in 10,000 years." "Yes," agreed. "They are violent, they are chaotic, they are dangerous, but they are also the only species in the galaxy that might answer our call. The fear nothing in the Compact. Perhaps they will fear The council argued for another full cycle. They debated and worried and calculated odds that did not exist. In the end, it came down to a simple choice. They could surrender to and face certain death, or they could call the humans and face uncertain chaos. A cast the deciding vote. 3 hours later, he stood alone in the communications chamber. The emergency beacon was an old device, installed long ago when Prime first joined the Galactic Compact. It had never been used. A's fingers hesitated over the activation panel. He thought about his people, the children who played in the Crystal Gardens, the scholars who spent their lives studying the mysteries of the universe, the artists who created beauty that made other species weep. All of them would die if he did nothing. He pressed the button. The signal went out at faster-than-light speeds, racing through the dark spaces between stars. It was a simple message, coordinates, a plea, a cry for help from a dying world. In a distant arm of the galaxy, in a system that other species avoided, the signal reached a human military installation. Alarms began to sound. Officers rushed to their stations. Reports were generated and sent up the chain of command. On Prime, A stood at the window and watched the ships block out the light. He did not know if the humans would come. He did not know if they could arrive in time. He did not know what would happen if they did. He only knew that he had made a choice, and now all he could do was wait. Far away, the humans were already moving. Commander was drinking her third cup of coffee when the alert came through. She was sitting in her ready room aboard the UEDC Perseverance, reviewing supply reports and trying to ignore the headache that had been building since morning. Command work was never as exciting as the recruitment videos promised. Then her console lit up with priority codes she had never seen before. 10 minutes later, she stood in the main briefing room with her senior officers. The message from the played on the main screen. It was simple and desperate. Their world was dying. They had them surrounded. They were begging for help. "How long until the deadline?" asked. 52 hours, her tactical officer replied, "give or take." "And how long to reach Prime at maximum speed?" 47 hours, if we push the engines past safety limits. Smiled, it was not a pleasant smile. "Then we better start pushing." The word went out across human space. A distress signal had been received. A species in the Galactic Compact was under attack. The United Earth Defense Coalition was responding. Within 6 hours, ships began arriving at the rally point. They were not the ships had expected. The Perseverance was a proper military vessel. It was a battle cruiser with heavy armor, powerful weapons, and a crew trained for combat. Had served on it for 8 years and knew every system like she knew her own heartbeat. The other ships were different. The first to arrive was a massive vessel covered in mining equipment and welding scars. Its hull was patchwork metal in a dozen different colors. Weapons had been bolted onto it in places where weapons should not go. The name painted on the side read Absolute Unit. "This is Captain of the Absolute Unit," a cheerful voice announced over the comm system. "We heard you needed some help. We used to be a mining ship, but we made some modifications. Hope that is okay." Looked at the ship. It was ugly. It was probably held together with tape and hope. It was also 3 times the size of the Perseverance. "Welcome to the fleet," she said. More ships arrived. A cargo hauler called the Hold My Beer showed up with a crew of civilian volunteers. They had no military training. They had no proper weapons. What they did have was a cargo hold full of asteroid debris, and a captain who claimed she could throw rocks really hard and really fast. A medical frigate named the Geneva Suggestion arrived next. Its captain was a small woman with gray hair and a smile that did not reach her eyes. The ship was supposed to be unarmed. Counted 17 visible weapon systems on its hull. "Medical supplies," the captain explained when asked about the guns, "for treating lead deficiency in hostile organisms." Then came the fighters, 24 pilots who flew small, fast attack craft. They called themselves the Feral Caucus and refused to explain why. Their leader was a young man named Jackson who had been court-martialed twice for reckless behavior. Both times, he had been reinstated because he was too good to lose. Gathered her unlikely fleet and explained the situation. They had 200 warships. They were facing them with 1 battle cruiser, 1 converted mining vessel, 1 cargo hauler, 1 medical frigate with illegal weapons, and 24 fighter pilots with discipline problems. "The Galactic Compact has advised against this mission," told them. "They say they are too strong. They say we cannot win. They say we should wait for diplomatic solutions." She paused and looked at the faces around her. Human faces, determined faces, slightly crazy faces. "I told them to go to hell. Any questions?" There were no questions, only cheers. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel. For 2 days, they raced through the darkness between stars. And during those 2 days, a visitor from the Galactic Compact observed human behavior for the first time. His name was. He was a species of small, nervous beings covered in soft blue fur. He had been assigned to the Perseverance as an official observer. His job was to document how humans responded to emergency situations. He was not prepared for what he witnessed. The humans did not spend their travel time in quiet meditation or careful planning. They spent it in constant activity that made no sense to. They gathered in groups and played games that involved throwing balls at each other. They listened to loud, aggressive sounds they called music. They consumed substances that were clearly poisonous and seemed to enjoy the effects. The substance called coffee was everywhere. Watched humans drink cup after cup of the dark liquid. He scanned it with his equipment and found it contained a chemical stimulant that would kill most species in the galaxy. The humans drank it for breakfast. They drank it during meetings. Some of them drank it constantly, all day long. "Is that not dangerous?" asked a human engineer. The engineer laughed. "Sure, but have you tried living without coffee? That is more dangerous." Did not understand the joke. He was starting to think he did not understand humans at all. He watched them prepare for battle. They cleaned weapons while telling each other stories about previous fights. They exercised by running in circles and lifting heavy objects for no clear reason. Some of them engaged in physical combat with each other, hitting and grappling and throwing each other to the ground. When asked if they were enemies, they explained it was just sparring and they did it for fun. Fun, they fought each other for fun. On the second day, attended a planning meeting. He expected careful strategy discussions, charts and graphs and probability calculations. Instead, he found Commander standing at a screen showing the fleet positions. "Okay," she said. "Here is the enemy, 200 ships, heavy armor, superior numbers, any ideas?" The suggestions came fast. Ram them, throw asteroids at them, deploy mining explosives, board their ships with cutting torches, draw them into the planet's gravity well, hack their communications and play human death metal until they surrendered. None of these suggestions seemed to be jokes. Commander managed to say, his voice was shaking. "These plans are suicide. You cannot simply charge into a superior force with no real strategy. There are rules of engagement, tactical doctrines, proper military procedure." Looked at him. She was smiling and saw that smile showed her teeth. Predator teeth, human teeth. "Rules are suggestions," she said. "Doctrines are guidelines, and proper military procedure is for people who want to play it safe." She turned back to the screen. "The called for help. They are dying. Every minute we spend planning is a minute they spend suffering. So we are going to go in there, hit them hard, and figure out the rest as we go." "That is insane," whispered. "That is human," replied. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Ahead of them, the blockade waited. 200 warships bristling with weapons. A fleet that had conquered dozens of worlds. A force that should have been impossible to defeat. Watched the human ships move into formation. He heard their battle communications. Music played over the channels. Humans were laughing, joking, making references he did not understand. "All ships," broadcast. "This is Commander, we have one job. Save the everything else is secondary. Fight hard, fight dirty. And if you die, make sure you take some with you." The channel filled with cheers and howls, and sounds that might have been battle cries. Began writing what he assumed would be his final report. He documented the fleet size, the lack of proper planning, the clear mental instability of the human species. Then the humans attacked, and discovered that the reports about Earth had not been exaggerations. If anything, they had been understatements. The Hive commander watched his sensors with cold satisfaction. His name was, and he had conquered 17 worlds for the Dominion. His fleet was the largest ever assembled for a single harvest operation. The would fall, and he would be rewarded with a new territory to rule. Then his sensor officer made a strange clicking sound, the sound of confusion. "Commander," the officer reported, "new contacts at the edge of the system." "How many ships?" demanded. "Has the Galactic Compact finally decided to interfere?" "5 ships, Commander, they are small." Made a sound of contempt. 5 ships against 200. Whatever species had sent this pathetic force was clearly mad. He would destroy them quickly and return to the harvest. "Identify the ships," he ordered. "What species dares challenge us?" The sensor officer was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The confusion was gone. Fear had replaced it. "Commander, the ships are human." The word spread through the command ship like a disease. Officers stopped their work. Soldiers looked at each other with uncertain eyes, even felt something cold move through his thorax. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about the 5 ships, said firmly. "They have 5 ships, we have 200, prepare for combat, destroy them quickly." But even as he gave the order, he felt doubt for the first time in his long career. The human fleet did not approach carefully. They did not scan the enemy positions. They did not open communications to negotiate. They simply accelerated to maximum speed and headed straight for the heart of the formation. Sat in her command chair and watched the enemy fleet grow larger on her screen. 200 warships, weapons charging, shields activating, a wall of death waiting to receive them. She smiled. "All ships," she broadcast. "Hold my beer, you are up first. Deploy the package." Captain Sarah of the Hold My Beer had been a cargo hauler pilot for 20 years. She had moved freight across human space, dodged pirates, and survived 3 engine failures. Nothing had prepared her for what she was about to do. But she was human. Humans adapted. "Opening cargo bay," she announced, deploying the package. The Hold My Beer had spent the last 2 days collecting debris, asteroids, metal fragments, ice chunks, industrial waste, anything heavy and solid that could be found in open space. 40,000 tons of garbage packed into the cargo hold. Now that cargo hold opened, and the garbage flew out at relativistic speeds. It was not a sophisticated weapon. It was barely a weapon at all. It was just mass, moving very fast, spreading across the space between the human fleet and the formation. The ships opened fire immediately. Their energy weapons were designed to destroy enemy vessels. They were not designed for this. Thousands of small objects, scattered across kilometers of space, moving too fast to track. The weapons hit some of them. They missed many more. The first impacts began. Shields were built to stop energy beams. They were not built to stop kinetic impacts. Rocks and metal and ice slammed into warships at speeds that comprehension. Shields flickered and failed. Hull plates cracked. Ships that had conquered worlds began to break apart. 30 vessels were damaged in the first 60 seconds. 12 were destroyed completely. Watched his fleet scatter in chaos. This was not how war was supposed to work. There were rules, traditions. You were supposed to face your enemy with weapons, not throw rocks at them like primitive beasts. "Maintain formation," he screamed. "Close with the enemy, destroy them at close range." His fleet tried to obey, and then the absolute unit arrived. Captain had been a miner before she became a captain. She had spent 30 years drilling into asteroids and pulling out valuable ore. She knew how to break things. She knew how to break things really well. The absolute unit had once been a mining ship. Now it was something else. Its reinforced hull was designed to survive asteroid impacts. Its mining lasers had been upgraded to military grade, and its forward section had been rebuilt into a solid wedge of armor 3 meters thick. Aimed her ship at the largest dreadnought, she pushed the engines past their maximum limits, and she rammed. The impact was visible from the surface of Prime, a flash of light as 2 massive ships collided. The dreadnought, built for combat but not for this kind of combat, buckled and tore. The absolute unit punched through its hull like a fist through paper. And then the boarding teams deployed. 100 human soldiers poured through the breach in the hull. They were not elegant warriors. They were miners and engineers and volunteers who had learned to fight in the 2 days of travel. They carried plasma cutters and industrial tools and improvised weapons made from whatever they could find. The soldiers met them with practiced military precision. They had trained for centuries. They had fought dozens of species. They knew how to win battles. They did not know how to fight humans. The first soldier fired his weapon with perfect accuracy. The shot hit the lead human directly in the chest. The human staggered, then kept coming. Body armor. The shot had not penetrated. The human reached the soldier and hit him with a mining hammer. One swing. The exoskeleton shattered. More humans poured in. They did not fight in formation. They did not follow tactical doctrine. They fought like the predators they had evolved from, fast, brutal, relentless. A officer his troops and established a defensive line. The humans flanked them. When they adjusted, the humans flanked them again. When they fell back to a stronger position, the humans simply walked through the walls using cutting torches. "They are not following the rules," the officer screamed into his communicator. "They are not supposed to fight like this." No one answered. His communicator had been jammed. The humans had hacked into the communication network and were broadcasting something they called music. The sound was terrible, loud and aggressive and painful to hearing. Meanwhile was making a call. "Attention Dominion," she broadcast on all frequencies. "You have threatened a species under human protection. You have exactly one chance to withdraw. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy." Heard the message on his damaged command ship. He looked at the chaos around him. Ships burning, communications jammed. A human vessel literally inside one of his dreadnoughts. He responded with contempt. "You are small," he said. "You are soft. You have no natural armor. You have 5 ships against 200. You will die here, human." His response was calm. "We will see." 30 seconds later, human Marines breached command deck. They came through the emergency hatch. 5 humans in heavy armor moving fast. Guards fired at them. Some shots hit. The humans kept moving. The leader was a small female, barely 5 feet tall. She ducked under a soldier's attack and drove a combat knife into his throat. She spun and kicked another soldier in the leg joint, collapsing him. She moved through the command deck like a dancer, leaving dead behind her. Tried to run. A human grabbed him and threw him to the ground. He looked up and saw the small female standing over him. She was smiling. She was laughing. "You know," she said, "you really should have just left when we asked nicely." On the surface of Prime, Ambassador stood with his council and watched the battle in the sky. They could see the flashes of weapons fire. They could see ships exploding. They could hear the human communications that their translators struggled to understand. "What does mean?" council member asked. Did not know, but as he watched the fleet begin to retreat, he found that he did not care. They had come, and they had brought chaos with them. But for the first time in 7 cycles, felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The battle for Prime entered its 2nd day. They had expected a quick victory. They had expected to crush the tiny human fleet and return to their harvest. Instead, they found themselves fighting for survival. And losing. The Geneva Suggestion had been listed as a medical frigate in all official records. Its captain, Dr. Helena, had served as a military doctor for 40 years. She had seen the worst that war could offer. She had healed soldiers and watched them die. And she had learned that sometimes the best way to save lives was to end other lives first. Her ship carried medical supplies. It also carried weapons that were definitely not legal under Galactic Compact law. "Target the slave ships," Helena ordered, "not to destroy, to liberate." They traveled with slave ships, captured species from a dozen conquered worlds, kept in chains for labor and harvesting. The ships were lightly defended. They never expected anyone to target them. The Geneva Suggestion moved through the battlefield with surprising speed. Its weapons were precise. They did not destroy the slave ships. They disabled their engines. They broke their communications. They opened their hatches. And then the signal went out. Helena had spent the 2-day journey preparing a message. It was simple. It was translated into every language the humans knew. It said, "You are free. Fight back. We will help you." On 15 slave ships, captured aliens heard those words. Some were too broken to respond. Some were too afraid. But some remembered what freedom felt like. Some were angry enough to act. The uprisings began. Guards on the slave ships suddenly found themselves under attack. Prisoners with nothing left to lose threw themselves at their captors. They used chains as weapons. They used their own bodies as shields. They died in large numbers, but they took with them. And while they were distracted, the Geneva Suggestion began rescue operations. Medical shuttles launched from its bays, docking with disabled slave ships and evacuating the freed prisoners. Doctors and nurses who had trained to save lives now worked under enemy fire, pulling wounded aliens to safety. "We are getting too much attention," Helena's first officer warned. "Enemy ships are moving to intercept." Helena smiled. It was not a kind smile. Let them come. The medical frigate that was not really a medical frigate opened fire with everything it had. Missiles that had been hidden in its hull, beam weapons disguised as sensor arrays, point defense systems that could shred fighters. 3 warships tried to stop the Geneva suggestion. 3 warships became expanding clouds of debris. In the space above Prime, the feral caucus was doing what they did best, flying too fast, taking too many risks, and winning. Lieutenant Jackson pushed his fighter through a turn that should have crushed him against his seat. The G-forces made his vision narrow to a tunnel. His bones creaked. His muscles screamed. He came out of the turn behind a bomber and destroyed it with a single shot. "That is 14, he shouted over the comm. "Anyone beating my score?" 15, another pilot responded. "Try to keep up, old man." The feral caucus did not fly like proper military pilots. They did not maintain formation. They did not follow attack patterns. They flew like the ancient predators of Earth, working together through instinct rather than orders. A squadron tried to trap them. The human pilots simply flew through the trap, taking damage that should have killed them, emerging on the other side to destroy the surprised from behind. Jackson found himself out of missiles and low on energy for his beam weapons. A bomber was ahead of him, moving toward Prime to begin ground attacks. He could not stop it with weapons. So he ejected. His fighter continued on its collision course, slamming into the bomber and destroying both ships. Jackson floated in space in his emergency suit, watching the explosion. A second bomber saw him, helpless, easy prey. It moved to finish him off. Jackson activated his suit's emergency thrusters, not to escape, to intercept. He landed on the hull of the bomber. His magnetic boots locked onto the metal. He pulled out his emergency tools and began cutting into the hull. The inside did not understand what was happening. Their sensors showed a single human on their hull. That was impossible. Humans could not survive in space. This must be an error. Then Jackson cut through into the bomber's command deck. The fight was short. There were pilots, not soldiers. Jackson was a human who had just jumped from his exploding fighter onto an enemy ship because it seemed like a good idea at the time. 5 minutes later, Jackson broadcast on the human channel. "Anyone need a bomber? I found one that was not being used properly." On the surface of Prime, the real battle was just beginning. Human drop pods had crashed into the ground near the capital. Each pod carried 10 soldiers and enough weapons to start a small war. They emerged into a world they did not know, facing enemies they had never fought, protecting aliens they had never met. Sergeant Maria was the first to set foot on soil. She looked at the crystal towers. She looked at the frightened aliens watching from windows. She looked at the ground forces advancing toward the city. "All right," she said to her squad. "Standard defensive procedure, set up positions, dig trenches, establish fields of fire." The ambassador approached her carefully. His crystal body was flickering with colors she could not interpret. "Sergeant," I said, "we do not understand. What are trenches?" Maria blinked. "Holes in the ground for protection. You hide in them and shoot at the enemy." I tilted his head. "You dig holes in the ground and fight from there." "Yes." "That is," he paused. His translator seemed to struggle. "That is very strange." Maria laughed. "Wait until you see what else we have planned." The humans worked through the night. They dug trenches around the capital. They built barriers from rubble and debris. They set up weapon positions that covered every approach, and they taught the how to fight. It was not easy. They had never held weapons. They had never thrown objects with intent to harm. They were beings of peace and thought, and violence was as foreign to them as crystal bodies were to humans. But they learned. Sergeant stood with a group of civilians and held up a glass bottle filled with fuel and fitted with a cloth wick. "This is simple," she explained. "You light the wick, You throw the bottle at the enemy, it breaks, fire happens, the enemy is not happy. A young, barely old enough to be called an adult, looked at the bottle with fascination. "This is a weapon," he asked. "It seems primitive." "It is primitive," agreed. "It is also effective. Humans have been using weapons like this for hundreds of years. Simple is good, simple works." The young took the bottle carefully. "What is it called?" "Molotov cocktail, named after a human who was very good at causing trouble." The ground assault came at dawn. Thousands of soldiers marching toward the capital. They expected no resistance. They expected to walk in and begin harvesting. They found trenches. They found barriers. They found humans with weapons waiting for them. And they found standing beside the humans, throwing bottles of fire. The first wave fell. The second wave stumbled over the first. The third wave tried to flank the defensive positions and found more trenches, more barriers, more humans. By the end of the second day, the ground forces had retreated. In space, their fleet had lost over 100 ships. Communications from the Hive commander had stopped completely. Rumors spread that he had been captured by the On the Perseverance reviewed the battle reports. They had taken losses. Good people had died, but the mission was succeeding. "Commander," said from his observer position. His voice was different now. The fear was still there, but something else had joined it. Respect, perhaps, or awe. "Yes. I have been watching your people fight. I have documented everything, and I still do not understand." He paused. "How do you do it? How do you win against impossible odds with no proper strategy?" Thought about the question. She looked at the screen showing her battered fleet, still fighting, still winning. "We have a strategy," she said finally. "It is just not one that makes sense to anyone else. We refuse to lose. We adapt. We try things that should not work and somehow they work anyway." She shrugged. "And we never ever give up, even when we should." Was silent for a long moment. "That is not a strategy," he said. "That is insanity." Smiled, "Welcome to humanity." The fleet broke on the third day. They had arrived with 200 warships. They left with 63. Their Hive commander was a prisoner aboard a human vessel, still not believing what had happened. Their ground forces were destroyed or captured. Their slave ships were empty, their cargo freed and scattered across a dozen rescue vessels. The last transmission was picked up by every listening post in the sector. It was simple and clear, broadcast on all frequencies as a warning to the rest of the Dominion. "Do not engage do not provoke them. Do not give them a reason to come for you. Run, run, and do not stop." On Prime, the twin suns shone through clear skies for the first time in 10 cycles. They emerged from their shelters and looked up at the light. Many of them wept, their crystal bodies shimmering with colors that had no names in human language. Ambassador walked through the ruined streets of his capital. Buildings had been damaged. Gardens had been trampled. The scars of battle were everywhere, but his people were alive. His world was free. He found Commander sitting on a piece of rubble, drinking from a small metal container. Her armor was scorched and dented. She had a cut above her left eye that was still bleeding slightly. She had not slept in 3 days. She looked exhausted and satisfied. "Commander," I said, "I do not have words to express what we owe you." Took another drink from her container and offered it to him. "Bourbon, earth drink. It helps after battles." I looked at the container uncertainly. Did not consume liquids the way humans did. But he took it anyway, holding it in his crystal hands as a gesture of respect. "I watched the battle," he said. "I watched your people fight. I have been a diplomat for 200 years. I have studied warfare as an academic subject. I thought I understood it." He paused, searching for words. "I was wrong. What your people did. It was not warfare as the galaxy understands it. It was not strategy or tactics or proper military procedure. It was chaos," offered, smiling slightly. "Controlled chaos," I corrected. That is what confuses me. There was no logic to your methods. Your people threw rocks. They rammed their ships into ours. They jumped onto enemy vessels and fought with hand tools. One of your pilots hijacked a bomber while floating in open space. None of this makes sense. Laughed. It was a warm sound, not the predator's display she had shown before the battle. This was a human being tired but happy, relaxed but proud. That is the human secret, Ambassador. We are not stronger than everyone else. We are not smarter. We do not have better technology or more resources. We just refuse to accept that we are supposed to lose. She gestured at the battlefield around them, at the trenches filled with tired soldiers, at the civilians still clutching the remains of their improvised weapons, at the sky where human ships still patrolled, watching for any sign of return. When a human sees impossible odds, we do not calculate our chances of failure. We look at the situation and think, well, let us see what happens. We try things. Most of the time we fail. But sometimes, just sometimes, we find a way that no one else would have thought of, because no one else was crazy enough to try. O was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the human commander. He looked at the soldiers around them. Some were resting. Some were tending to wounds. A group of them had started a game with a ball, laughing and shouting as if they had not been fighting for their lives just hours ago. Others were helping. Human medics worked alongside healers, treating the wounded of both species. Human engineers were already assessing the damaged buildings, making plans for repair. One group of soldiers had gathered children and was teaching them a game that involved kicking a round object. The galaxy thinks we are monsters, said quietly. And maybe we can be when we need to be. We have done terrible things. Our history is full of violence and war and destruction. We are not proud of all of it. She stood up, stretching muscles that had been still for too long. But we came here because someone asked for help. Someone was in trouble and they called out and we answered. That is who we are too. Monsters when we have to be. Protectors when we choose to be, and friends to anyone who needs one. I watched the human soldiers playing with the children. The children were laughing. They had been terrified for 10 cycles, expecting death or worse. Now they were laughing, chasing a ball, learning a game from creatures from another world. I think, I said slowly, I understand now why the reports about your species were so contradictory. You are described as monsters and heroes, destroyers and builders, cruel and kind. I thought the reports were exaggerated. I thought they were confused. He turned to face directly. Now I understand. All of the reports were true. You are all of those things all at once, depending on what you choose to be. Nodded. That is probably the most accurate description of humanity I have ever heard. Far above them, on the Perseverance, was completing his final report. He had been writing it for 3 days, trying to find words that would capture what he had witnessed, trying to explain the unexplainable. He read it over one last time. To the Galactic Compact High Council, this is observer of the delegation, reporting on the human response to the Prime emergency. The humans arrived with 5 ships against 200. They had no formal battle plan. They had limited resources. By all logical measures, they should have been destroyed within the first hour of combat. They were not destroyed, they won. I have attempted to analyze their tactics. I have studied their methods. I have interviewed their commanders and soldiers, and I have reached conclusions that I expect the Council will find disturbing. The humans do not fight wars the way civilization demands. They do not follow rules, conventions, or logic. They are unpredictable, terrifying, and absolutely unhinged by galactic standards. They threw rocks at warships. They rammed their vessels into enemy formations. They boarded enemy ships with mining equipment. They ejected from damaged fighters and hijacked enemy bombers in open space. They taught peaceful civilians to make fire bombs. None of this should have worked. All of it did. I observed their commander closely. is a skilled officer, but she is not a genius. She does not have supernatural abilities. She is simply human, and that, I have learned, is enough. Humans have a quality that other species lack. They call it stubbornness, or determination, or the refusal to accept defeat. Whatever name you give it, the result is the same. When humans decide to fight, they fight until they win or until they are completely destroyed. There is no middle ground. There is no surrender. They are also not what the reports describe, or rather they are exactly what the reports describe, but incomplete. Yes, they are dangerous. Yes, they are chaotic. Yes, they are capable of terrible violence. But they also saved a world. They freed thousands of slaves. They protected people they had never met from a species they barely knew at great cost to themselves. When the battle was over, they did not demand payment or territory. They helped rebuild. They healed the wounded. They played games with children. My recommendation to the council is simple. Do not make enemies of them, make friends. Offer them the drink they call coffee. Learn to appreciate their chaos. They may be the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They are also, it must be noted, exactly who you want answering when you cry for help. End report. Saved the document and sent it to the Galactic Compact. He knew it would be read by every military academy, every diplomatic corps, every species that had ever wondered about the strange creatures from Earth. He hoped they would understand. On the surface of Prime, the twin suns began to set. The sky turned gold and rose, just as it always had. The crystal towers caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. Stood with and watched the sunset. Around them, humans and worked together, soldiers and civilians, warriors and scholars, two species that had nothing in common, brought together by violence and staying together by choice. What happens now? Asked. Smiled. Now we rebuild. We help. We make sure they never come back. And we go home, eventually, to tell everyone about the brave who stood beside us and threw fire at their enemies. We were not brave, we were terrified. That is what brave means, ambassador, being terrified and doing it anyway. I considered this. It was a very human way of thinking, strange, contradictory, and somehow deeply true. Commander, he said finally, I think the galaxy has misunderstood your species. The reports call you monsters, dangerous creatures to be avoided. He reached out and placed his crystal hand on her armored shoulder. It was a gesture of friendship among the highest honor they could offer. I will write my own report, and I will give you a new name, one that fits better. What name is that? I looked at the sunset, at the free sky, at his people, alive and laughing for the first time in 10 cycles. Protectors, he said. The protectors came when we called, and nothing was ever the same again. Smiled, around her, humans, and continued to work to heal, to rebuild. Above them, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, other species were listening. Other worlds were watching. The story of Prime would spread across the galaxy. And the next time someone faced impossible odds, the next time someone needed help, they would know who to call. The protectors, the humans. The ones who answered when the galaxy cried out. And brought absolute chaos with them.